Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today we are going to talk about Greek mythology. Greek mythology is the body of myths originally told by the ancient Greeks and a genre of ancient Greek folklore. These stories concern the origin and the nature of the world, the lives and activities of deities, heroes, and mythological creatures, and the origin and significance of the ancient Greeks' own cult and ritual practices. Modern scholars study the myths in an attempt to shed light on the religious and political institutions of ancient Greece and its civilization, and to gain understanding of their nature and myth making itself. In Greek mythology, there is no single origin text like the Christian Bible or the Hindu Vedas that introduces all the myths, characters, and stories. Instead, the earliest Greek myths were part of an oral tradition that began in the Bronze Age, and their plots and themes unfolded gradually in the written literature of the archaic and classical periods. The poet Homer's 8th century BC epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, tell the story of the mythical Trojan War as a divine conflict as well as human one. They do not, however, bother to introduce the gods and goddesses who are their main characters, since readers and listeners would already have been familiar with them. Around 700 BC, the poet Hesiod's Theogony offered the first written cosmogony or origin story of Greek mythology. The Theogony tells the story of the universal journey from nothingness to being, and details an elaborate family tree of elements, gods, and goddesses who evolved from chaos and descended from earth, sky, sea, and the underworld. Late Greek writers and artists used it and elaborated upon these sources in their own work. For instance, mythological figures and events appear in the 5th century plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and the lyric poems of Pindar. Writers such as the 2nd century BC Greek mythographer Apollodorus of Athens and the 1st century BC Roman historian Gaius Julius Hyginus compiled the ancient myths and legends for contemporary audiences. At the center of Greek mythology is the pantheon of deities who were said to live in Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. From their perch, they ruled every aspect of human life. Olympian gods and goddesses looked like men and women, though they could change themselves into animals and other things, and were, as many myths recounted, vulnerable to human foibles and passions. The 12 main Olympians are Zeus, the king of all the gods and god of weather, law, and fate; Hera, the queen of the gods and goddesses of women and marriage; Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and love; Apollo, god of prophecy, music, and poetry and knowledge; Ares, god of war; Artemis, goddesses of hunting, animals, and childbirth; Athena, goddess of wisdom and defense; Demeter, goddess of agriculture and grain; Dionysus, god of wine, pleasure, and festivity; Hephaestus, god of fire, metal working, and sculpture; Hermes, god of travel, hospitality, and trade, and Zeus's personal messenger. Poseidon, god of the sea. Other gods and goddesses sometimes included in the roster of Olympians are Iliad, god of the underworld; Hestia, goddess of home and family; Eros, god of sex and minion to Aphrodite. Greek mythology, heroes and monsters. Greek mythology doesn't just tell the stories of gods and goddesses, however, human heroes such as Heracles, the adventurer who performed 12 impossible labors for King Eurystheus and was subsequently worshipped as a god for his accomplishment. Pandora, the first woman whose curiosity brought evil to mankind. Pygmalion, the king who fell in love with an ivory statue. Arachne, the weaver who was turned into spider for her arrogance. Handsome Trojan prince. Ganymede, who became the cupbearer for the gods. Midas, the king with the golden touch. Narcissus, the young man who fell in love with his own reflection, are just as significant. Monsters and hybrids, human animal forms, also feature prominently in the tales. The winged horse, Pegasus, the horseman's centaur, the lion woman Sphinx, and the bird woman Harpias. The one-eyed giant, Cyclops, automatons, metal creatures given life by Hephaestus, manticores and unicorns, gorgons, pygmies, minotaurs, satyrs, and dragons of all sorts. Many of these creatures have become almost as well as gods, goddesses, heroes who share their stories. The characters, stories, themes, and lessons of Greek mythology have shaped art and literature for thousands of years. They appear in Renaissance paintings such as Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Raphael's Triumph of Galatea, and writings like Dante's Inferno, romantic poetry and libretti, and score Achilles. The warrior Achilles is one of the great heroes of Greek mythology. According to legend, Achilles was extraordinarily strong, courageous, and loyal. But he had one vulnerability: his Achilles' heels. Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, tells the story of his adventures during the last year of the Trojan War. Like most mythological heroes, Achilles had a complicated family tree. His father was Peleus, the mortal king of the Myrmidons, a people who, according to legend, were extraordinarily fearless and skilled soldiers. His mother was Thetis. Did you know that today we use the various phrases from this Greek mythology to describe various things? For example, Achilles' heels to describe a powerful person's fatal weakness. According to myths and stories composed long after the Iliad, Thetis was extraordinarily concerned about her baby son's mortality. She did everything she could to make him immortal. She burned him over a fire every night, then dressed his wounds with ambrosial ointment, and she dunked him into the river Styx, whose waters were said to confer the invulnerability of the gods. However, she gripped him tightly by the foot as she dipped him into the river, so tightly that the water never touched his heel. As a result, Achilles was invulnerable everywhere. When he was 9 years old, a seer predicted that Achilles would die heroically in battle against the Trojans. When she heard about this, Thetis, the mother of Achilles, disguised him as a girl and sent him to live in the Aegean island of Sicros to be a great warrior against Achilles' fate. However, soon he left Skyros and joined the Greek army. In a last ditch effort to save her son's life, Thetis asked the divine blacksmith Hephaestus to make a sword and shield that could keep him safe. The armor that Hephaestus produced from Achilles did not make him immortal, but it was distinctive enough to be recognized by friend and foe alike. When Homer wrote the Iliad in about 720 BC, however, readers and listeners would not have known any of this. They only knew that Achilles was a great hero, that he had superhuman strength and courage, and that he was supremely handsome. Homer painted a more nuanced pictures. In addition to these qualities, his Achilles was vengeful and quick to anger, could be petulant when he did not get his way. He was also deeply loyal and would sacrifice anything for his friends and family. According to legend, the Trojan War began when the god King Zeus decided to reduce Earth's mortal population by arranging a war between the Greeks and the Trojans. Homer called these Greeks the Achaeans. He did this by meddling in their political and emotional affairs. At Achilles' parents' wedding banquet, Zeus invited the prince of Troy, a young man named Paris, to judge a beauty contest between the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each of the goddesses offered Paris a bribe in exchange for his vote. Aphrodite was the most alluring. She promised to give the young prince the most beautiful wife in the world. Unfortunately, the wife in question, Helen, the daughter of Zeus, was already married to someone else, Menelaus, the king of Sparta. At Aphrodite's urging, Paris went to Sparta, won Helen's heart, and took her back to Troy. Menelaus vowed revenge. He assembled an army of Greece's greatest warrior, including Achilles and his Myrmidons, and set off to conquer Troy and get his wife back. In Homer's telling, this war lasted for 10 bloody years. When the Iliad begins, the Trojan War has been going on for 9 years. Achilles, the poem's protagonist, has led one battle after another. He has met with great success. In fact, he is undefeated in battle, but the war itself has reached a stalemate. Homer's story focuses on a different conflict. However, the quarrel between his hero and Agamemnon, the leader of the Achaean armies, and Menelaus' brother. In a battle that took place before the poem began, Agamemnon had taken as a concubine a young Trojan woman named Chryseis. Chryseis' father, a priest of the god Apollo, tried to buy his daughter's freedom, but Agamemnon mocked his entreaties and refused to release the girl. Enraged, Apollo punished the Greek armies by sending a plague to kill the soldiers one by one. As his ranks thinned, Agamemnon finally agreed to allow Chryseis to return to her father. However, he demanded a replacement concubine in exchange, Achilles' wife, the Trojan princess Berenice. Achilles did his commander asked, and relinquished his bride. Then he announced that he would no longer fight on Agamemnon's behalf. He gathered his belongings, including the armor Hephaestus had made, and refused to come out of his tent. With the Greeks' heroes warrior of the battlefield, the tide began to turn in favor of the Trojans. The Greeks lost one battle after another. Eventually, Achilles' best friend, the soldier Patroclus, was able to wrangle a compromise. Achilles would not fight, but he would let Patroclus use his powerful armor as a disguise. That way, the Trojans would think that Achilles had returned to battle and would retreat in fear. The plan was working until Apollo, still seething about Agamemnon's treatment of crises, and her father intervened on the Trojans' behalf. He helped the Trojan prince Hector to find and kill Patroclus. Furious Achilles vowed to take revenge. He chased Hector back to Troy, slaughtering Trojans all the way. When they got to the city walls, Hector tried to reason with his pursuer, but Achilles was not interested. He stabbed Hector in the throat, killing him. Hector had begged for an honorable burial in Troy, but Achilles was determined to humiliate his enemy even in death. He dragged Hector's body behind his chariot all the way back to the Achaean camp and tossed it on the garbage heap. However, in the poem's last section, Achilles finally relents. He returns Hector's body to his father for a proper burial. In his Iliad, Homer does not explain what happened to Achilles. According to later legends and bits of pieces of Homer's own Odyssey, the warrior returned to Troy after Hector's funeral to exact further revenge for Patroclus' death. However, the still vengeful Apollo told Hector's brother Paris that Achilles was coming. Paris, who was not a brave warrior, ambushed Achilles as he entered Troy. He shot his unsuspected enemy with an arrow, which Apollo guided to the one place he knew Achilles was vulnerable, his heel, where his mother's hand kept the waters of the Styx from touching his skin. Achilles died on the spot, till still undefeated in battle. Greek mythology has had an extensive influence on the culture, arts, and literature of Western civilization and remains part of Western heritage and language. Poets and artists from ancient times to the present have derived inspiration from Greek mythology and have discovered contemporary. It was all about the Greek mythology. There are so many other good things about this Greek mythology, but the time does not allow us to speak further. So it is all for today. Allah Hafiz. Take care.